You are listening to the Invitation Church podcast. To learn more about Invitation Church, visit us online at invitation605.com. You can also download our app on iTunes and Google Play by searching for Invitation 605.
Well, good morning. I'd like to start out by telling you a story, if you don't mind, because I like stories. So this story starts out with a friend of mine by the name of Adam, and for those of you that don't know Adam Seif, I should exegete just this part of the story. If you have Adam involved and me involved, there's a whole lot of good decision making in the story, okay? And so Adam and I used to like to road trip, still like to road trip, and if you know anything about me, I don't like road trips that go well, because those aren't fun. I like road trips that have some curves and some challenges and some things to kind of figure out. Well, this particular road trip, we were in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We used to go to Grand Rapids, Michigan. There was a pastor there that we used to like to kind of see what was going on in his church, and he would take some time out. It would be a strong word to say he was our mentor, but to mentor us for those times that we were up there. And so we used to like to go up there. And so we were in Grand Rapids, and we had just gotten to Grand Rapids that night, and this particular night we're sitting in Taco Bell because we were splurging for supper that night. And I'm in my mid-20s, and so that puts kind of Adam in his early 20s, or yeah, I'd probably be early 20s at that time. We're sitting in Taco Bell, and we're eating, and we notice we're kind of like along the window, and you know how Taco Bell is, like it's 7 feet to the next window on the other side of the place, and we notice there's a gentleman over there eating. We're the only people in Taco Bell, and here's what we notice about the gentleman. One, he looks a little rough. You know, I don't know how else to explain it. He looks rough, a little scary. Maybe he's been through life and has experienced life a little bit. And we notice that he's got a backpack on, and he's got a small box about this big by this big. And it looks maybe that he doesn't shower all that often, that he's trying to make his way through traveling, and he's just drinking soda at this time, and he actually came in after us, and so we noticed he didn't get any food. So we thought, hey, let's just go make a connection with him, introduce ourselves. So we go up and we introduce ourselves, and he gives us his name, and I don't even remember his name. I'm going to call him John. And so he says, hi, I'm John. We say, hey, would you like to have a couple tacos or something like that? He kind of communicates it. I wish it was like, yeah, I'd love to have one, but it was kind of like this grumpy, I don't like you, but yes, I'd like to have a taco, right? And so we bought him a taco, and we come down, and we give him a taco, and then that just started a connection with him. So then we got done eating, and we decided it was time to go. We wanted to go watch a movie that night. Bruce Almighty had just came out, right? What a great movie. And so we were going to go watch Bruce Almighty in the theater, and when we're out walking out, he says, hey, would you guys be willing to give me a ride? And we thought, let's see, stranger, looks rough, maybe a little bit dangerous. Yes, we would like to give you a ride. And so we took him out to, we said, why don't you come with us? He grabs his backpack, and he grabs this little box that he has, and he comes out to the car with us, and we're in this little Grand Am, so it's a two-door car, and it's got two bucket seats in the front, bench seat in the back. He said he'll sit in back, so he's trying to get in the back seat, and he's got the backpack on, and he's got the box in his hands, and he's having a tough time getting in the back seat. So Adam says, how about you let me hold that box for you? And I can't speak his complete language, but he basically gets very upset, and he's like, no flipping way, Junior. And we're like, whoa, interesting. I wonder what's in that box. Well, today we're going to start out in Ephesians chapter 3. Here's what I'd like for you to do, because we won't have it up on the screen. If you have a cell phone, type in Ephesians 3 into your internet browser of your choice, because I'm not promoting any certain one. And we're gonna work through verses 1 through 13. If you want to take a quick glance at that, you can. I'm not going to read the whole passage. We're going to read it in chunks, and we'll kind of look and see what is happening here today. But the passage starts out with this. For this reason, so for some reason, right, that Paul has already expressed, I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ Jesus, for the sake of you Gentiles. So Paul starts out like for this reason, for some stuff I've already explained. I'm guessing it's some stuff that's been taught in the last week. Paul wants to make it clear that he is the one sending this message. Now, I got to be honest with you. Academically, we're not sure if Paul actually wrote this letter or not, but what we do know, even if Paul didn't write this letter himself, it was probably somebody who was a student of Paul's that wanted to make sure Ephesus knew this letter was coming from this guy named Paul. By saying the name Paul, you probably would get a reaction. I love Paul because wherever Paul goes, he creates disruption. Paul is not the kind of guy who comes and, everybody comes to a picnic and they get the guitar out and they sing Kumbaya. So this guy, Paul, like, I am Paul, you got to understand what people would have known about him and knew what he was. Paul started out wouldn't have been a Christian family at that time, but a God-fearing family in the community of Tarsus, right? He was in the club from a baby, and he was committed to it. He was a Jew of all Jews, highly committed to living right, living holy, doing all the right things for God. In fact, he was so committed to God that this new group of Jews came up. They were called followers of the way because there was this guy named Jesus who was the way, and there were people that were following him. And he was so incredibly upset at this group because this Jesus guy was taken to Jerusalem, put on a cross, and died, and he thought, how embarrassing that we're going to let a group say that this guy was the Messiah, a guy that died, that didn't end up conquering Rome, didn't end up changing the world, didn't end up forcing anybody to do anything. And we, as good Jewish people, are supposed to be the light so that all the Gentiles and all the people who don't have it figured out can figure it out and live their life like we have lived it because we have figured it out. We have lots and lots of books that have figured it out. It started with the 10 Commandments of this is kind of how you live, but now we have lots and lots of books. In fact, like when we're trying to figure out how to live the Sabbath, we have books on how to live the Sabbath that tell you how many steps you can take away from your house before you break the Sabbath. We have books on who you can eat with and when you can eat with them so that you are a good, moral, standing citizen in the church, in what God is doing, so you have no confusion. We have blessed assurance in everything you're doing. Not necessarily God, but we have blessed assurance in our morality. We have it figured out. And now there's this guy, Jesus, who kind of blew it wide open, and then on top of it all, let Rome just kill him. And this was what Paul was up to. He was a zealous Jew, right? And here's just right from the scriptures what happened with Paul when he was in the club, so to speak. In Acts 8:3 it says, as for Paul, he made havoc for the church. Not the temple, not the original people who were in and who God loved and who knew the morality, but the church, meaning the followers of the way. This ecclesia. He entered every house and dragging off men and women, committing them to prison. So not only did he know the holiness code, he was going to enforce the rules, right? So not only do we have rules and expectations, he was going to enforce them. It also says this in Acts 9. Then Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked for letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the way, any of the people who were following Jesus, who was kind of blowing this thing a little bit wide open and making it a little bit too expansive for people, whether men or women, so whether they were men or women, that he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. That all these people that aren't following this holiness code and are going a different way and are following this guy Jesus, I have a letter from the temple that says if I find them and they're doing these things and they're following the way of Jesus, I can just tie them up and bring them to the temple. God bless Sunday morning service when you're pulling people in bound, right? Like, hey, these people are doing the thing. So that's part of Paul's life. But Paul also has a conversion, right? We have this idea or this story. He's on the road to Damascus, and somehow this angel or this spiritual force meets him, and he gets converted to become the follower of the way. And of course, at that point, then Paul becomes peaceful and makes peace for everybody and makes everybody comfortable. Not so much. I want to just share with you Paul's interaction in the community of Ephesus, not in any other community. What goes on. So now, Paul becomes just as fired up about having people follow the way of Jesus. Here's what happens just from chapter Acts 19 and chapter 21, that happens in Ephesus, all right? Paul goes to Ephesus. When he first goes to Ephesus, Paul actually starts preaching in the equivalent of the church of that day, which would be the synagogue, where the people who are following the Ten Commandments, who are following Yahweh, are meeting. And he starts preaching about Jesus, and Jesus changing lives and healing people and bringing in both Jew and Gentile and expanding the kingdom to people we never at that time would have thought could have been a part of it. So in good effort, people get mad at Paul and they kick him out of the synagogue. He gets kicked out of his church, right? He never, ever once said, I want to not be a part of this. He just had this experience with Christ that changed how he approached it, and he wanted to share that with everybody, and that causes him to get kicked out of his church. So instead, he goes to the lecture hall of Tyrannus, which is really kind of an interesting place. It's where all kinds of thoughts and thinking went on. So I don't know what to compare it to here, but it would be in some place where all kinds of thinkers gather and share their way, and people would just come to listen to all sorts of thinking. So he goes there and he starts sharing his message. Now when he's sharing his message, there were people that practiced sorcery that started bringing their scrolls that were all about this sorcery, and they started bringing them to the temple and destroying them in this lecture hall. So now you have him messing not only with the good church, right? The good Jewish people. Now he's messing with the people who practice sorcery, because they're losing probably the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars of scrolls, because he's messing with this new society, because people are hearing his message, they're believing it, and it's causing, again, a disruption for all of those who practice sorcery. But he doesn't only disrupt the church, he doesn't only disrupt those who are practicing sorcery. And remember, it becomes a disruption because people are believing Paul's message. That's the disruption. He's not asking them to do anything bad or, pick up arms or have a revolution. They're believing Paul's message and they're becoming a part. But the last part we see in Acts 19 is Paul's message actually disrupts the economy. It wreaks havoc on the actual economics of Ephesus. Because, see, in Ephesus, they worship this god, and that god is named Artemis. And here's the deal about Artemis. You need to do everything you can to please Artemis, because if Artemis is pleased, you'll have a good harvest, your kids will be safe, and all those things. Part of pleasing Artemis is you needed to have a little statue built for you by craftsmen that you would put in your house to show that Artemis was on your side. Well, when Paul is preaching this gospel, this grace, this mystery of Christ, people are changing, and now all of a sudden they're not buying statues of Artemis, and the economy is tanking. And I wouldn't say it's tanking, it's changing. It's changing. There's probably a new economy that could be built up around this message of the gospel and around this mystery. This is how bad it was. They filled the stadium in Ephesus, which was one of the biggest stadiums in the world. And people are in this stadium, and they're getting all worked up, and they're yelling, "Great is Artemis! Great is Artemis! Great is Artemis!" Because they're mad at Paul, and they want to remind people, like, this is the way we've always done it. This is how it's always been. This is how it's always occurred. And Paul is working this up, and Paul, in his infinite wisdom, tells his disciples, he says, I want to get in there and talk to those people. And the story goes on that his disciples say, no, I don't think this is safe for you. This is not the time to show up, okay? This might be equivalent to showing up at I'm a Broncos fan, nominally, not very well, but let's pretend I'm a super big Broncos fan. It might be me showing up for the Kansas City Chiefs pep rally to give a speech on why the Broncos are better. All right? And then multiply that by about 300,000. And that would be what Paul was walking into. But anyways, in this story, it's very interesting. All of a sudden, the city clerk gets a little upset because there's another group at play here, which is the government. And the government at this time, Ephesus, is under the control of Rome. It can kind of do its thing, but ultimately it's Rome. And one thing Rome doesn't like civil disruption that it doesn't have control over. And now there's this stadium full of people yelling, "Great is Artemis, great is Artemis, great is Artemis," almost like a riot. And the city clerk shows up and he goes, Is there any proof here? Any proof here that Paul's done anything wrong? Because if there is, we got to arrest him and kill him so that we can show Rome that we are trying to keep order. And basically they were only upset that they weren't selling statues. So when Paul shows up, he disrupts the church, he disrupts the economy, he disrupts the government, he disrupts all sorts of things. My favorite part of the riot is before the riot is done, Paul looks at his disciples and says, "Oh, by the way, I'm going to head out to Jerusalem, so good luck here in Ephesus," right? And walks out while all this disruption is coming. One last thing I'll share about the disruption with him. He also not just disrupts the local church, he disrupts the Jewish religion in a major and a huge way when he's preaching his message. Because if we go on to Acts 21 then, he shows up at the temple and he has the gall to show up with people who are not circumcised. OMG. Right? Because we all know that if you're going to be a good Jew, you should become circumcised. Anybody can become a good Jew if you do X, Y, and Z. And Paul has said, no, you can become part of what God's doing. Just become a part of it. Just join in. See what God's up to. And he brings these guys to Jerusalem. And remember, Paul's a good Jew. It is meaningful for him, the ancient practices. And so he comes and he is doing the ancient practices in the temple. And he has these Gentiles doing the practices with him. So they're now there worshiping God in the temple. And what happens? The very highest, most elite religious leaders get upset, and it says they start beating Paul, physically beating him up in the temple because of who he has allowed in and who he has brought into the temple. And again, Jerusalem doesn't want to have a riot, because if Jerusalem has a riot, then it makes the government upset. And the highest thing is we don't want to have the government upset, because then Rome will come in and forcefully take things over. So it says that there were hundreds of soldiers that come into the temple to rescue Paul and to pull him out. And they take him and they put him on house arrest, where Felix, kind of the guy who was overseeing that area, had his house, which was actually a beautiful spot. So that's who this letter is written by. That's the power of just the statement, I, Paul. Right? Just that statement, I, Paul, is like, holy cow, this thing is disruptive. So back to the story about the box. So the guy was pretty grumpy, right? Gets after Adam. None of your flipping business, Junior, because we were a little younger than him, with a gruff. And then I was like, whoa, this could get kind of interesting. So we're now driving through Grand Rapids, and we're just trying to make small talk with the guy. Now, all of our valuable stuff was in the back seat. And at this point in our life, I mean all of our valuable stuff was in the back seat, right? We had a laptop, we had some stuff like that. And so we get asking, hey, where are you heading? He's like, well, I'm heading to the other side of town. Basically, I've been hitchhiking to get to Grand Rapids, and I finally got here. And we're like, well, what are you coming for? And he's like, I got business to do. And we're like, oh, what kind of business? He said, business. And we're like, oh. And we're like, so where are you coming from? And I can't remember the name of the town, but he gives the name of the town because he just got let out of jail. Oh, So you're coming to town to do business you won't tell us about because you're out of jail. Now he had put his little box, you know how cars have the center console and you can put stuff on there? So he had sat that there because he's sitting in the middle of the back bench seat so he can talk to us too. We're now aggressively watching our rear view mirrors to make sure stuff's not disappearing. Sorry, it's just what we were doing. And it's working up. Well, anyways, one of the cell phones weren't working, so Adam goes to plug one of the cell phones in, and at that time the cigarette lighter or the power jack is inside the console. So he puts his hand on the box just to move it so he can open up the center console, and the guy goes, "Get your hands off that box!" And we're like, whoa. Now this made us a little bit more curious. So we're like, dude, what's all the passion? What's all the drama around this box? This time I'm asking, and he's just like, "It's none of your flipping business, Junior." And we're like, all right. But it's creating just a little bit more sense of what is going on in this box. So if we continue in Ephesians 3, Paul writes this, or Paul's student writes this: "Surely you have heard about the administration of God's grace that was given to me for you. That is the mystery made known to me by revelation, as I have already written briefly. In reading this, then, you will be able to understand my insight into the mystery of Christ, which was not made known to people in other generations, as it has been now revealed by the Spirit of God's holy apostles and prophets. This mystery," man, he loves that word. "This mystery is that through the gospel, the Gentiles," basically the people who have always been out, that the Jews are trying to save by example to get to adopt all their moral codes so someday they will be out, "that the Gentiles are now heirs." Heirs mean you're part of the family. Heirs mean you get the same thing as rest of the family. Heirs mean you have the same rights as rest of the family member. Are heirs together with Israel. So it's interesting because we don't kick the people out either. We don't kick the current people out who are working through and trying to figure God out either. It's like we say, both of you, all of you have access. And all of you have opportunity to figure it out. Paul doesn't take a side, but he definitely is inviting another group in. And then members together of one body and share together in the promise of Jesus Christ. So let's look at just a couple pieces of this part of the scripture, and then we'll continue to move on. First, it says, "Surely you have heard about my grace as I have previously written." If you go back and review the Greek here, "as I have previously written" is translated "per my last email." You guys know those? Per my last email, right? Look, I'm telling you something again because you're still having a hard time getting it, so I need you to think about the past things I've said. Per my last email, what Paul wants us to know is this gift, this grace that I'm talking about, per my last email. Don't want to write it about again. I've already shared it with you. I'm telling you about it. I want us to move forward. And when I think of per my last email, we're not sure if it was a previous letter, but we really believe here, kind of by the way the grammar is going, that what he's saying is per what I've already written in this letter. Per the previous things I've written about, this is the grace I'm talking about. And when I think about the gift is making this mystery known, I'm like, what has Paul made known up to this point? Paul has made known up to this point that Christ has given a pledge for everybody's inheritance, including the Gentiles, right? Like Christ has done something, has initiated something, has given something that allows everybody inheritance into this gospel. Paul tells us we're saved by grace, not saved by grace if, not saved by grace when. Saved by grace, gift, God's intentional purpose in looking and moving towards us, period. That we've been separated, and here he's talking about Gentiles, but now are near. We've been not allowed a part of this. Gentiles have not been allowed a part of it, but now they're near. More importantly, they're not just near like you're kind of in proximity, but like you're within, you're amongst, would be the word that he uses. So that's per my last email. That we're God's masterpiece, his poiousa. We're his handiwork. We're this thing that he created, and that from the beginning, he created us, all of humanity, to be his masterpiece, and that he created us predestined from the beginning that we would do good works, that we would be engaged in this world we live in, moving it forward and making it better and being a part of what God was doing to form it and what he started in the garden. We would be progressing that forward. And we see that message right away in the Hebrew poem, that we're put in the garden to tend and to care for it. That we're put in the garden to do something to do with it. He created us from the beginning to do good works. And finally, the other thing, and there's a little bit more, we see that per my last email, Paul sees Jesus as bringing Jews and Gentiles together in the church, which is the term ecclesia, which we'll get to later, to form a new temple. That there's a new place and a new way that you can come and gather and experience God. And that seems to be in contrast with the past way, which was to go to Jerusalem, to a physical brick and mortar place. That there's this new way, not that you couldn't experience God there, but that there's this new way where God kind of takes up and dwells and you can experience God. So, some things I see in this passage that I just want to point out, I don't know if I have answers for them, is Paul seems to think that the grace, that the gift is Christ as a mystery. Interesting, right? A mystery. What do we know about mysteries? Why do we like to watch movies that are mysteries? I would also say seeing Christ as a mystery could contradict the common way for the Jews, which saw the Christ, the Messiah, Christ is another term for the Messiah, as somebody who understood exactly what the holiness code was and was going to come back and straighten everybody else out and make them, by force, either get on board with the holiness code or be an outsider, and there would be consequences to pay for the outsider. So it's interesting that this idea of mystery could contradict with the common way of thinking. And he does give some parameters for the mystery. That this mystery is that the Gentiles are heirs together with the Jews. So that people who have never really thought of themselves as experiencing and being a part of God's work, together with the people who have always thought of themselves as being a part of God's work, together, forming this new temple or this new church. So this makes me personally ask a few questions. Who might be a part of God's work or God a part's family that I've never considered or thought could be? Where am I being challenged that people might be a part of God's work that I just don't think they can be? Primarily Chiefs fans. Isn't it great that this mystery or that this temple or that this place that God dwells is that it's humanity or us together? In a room together? Brushing up alongside of each other, visiting with each other, learning from each other, and together. And then this makes me wonder, what can the people that I gather with at my kitchen table, in this room, in my job, what can they learn from me? Because I bring something to it in some work that God's doing. And on the flip side of that, what can I learn from them? This seems to be the mystery, is this crazy gathering of people. So, we continue down the road, and this guy gets more and more angry. At this time, he's taken the box off the center console, right? Now, he has the box like this, and he is holding on to the box, and he is holding onto it tight. I am getting more and more curious. What is in the box? Some of the reason I'm getting curious is, are we going to die? Right? Like, do I need to make a safety measure here? Should we run? Let's ditch the car and save our lives. I don't know, right? Like, what's going to happen here? So we're getting more and more curious, and we keep making runs at this box. Run after run after run after run. So I'm going to try to create some empathy with him, right? And use that to honestly manipulate what I want to know. But I'm trying to give some genuine empathy to him, and I'm like, we all go through some things in life, and I can tell you when you're with us, like no matter who you are, we can kind of take you where you are. And I try to just share where we're at. I said, here's the deal. I really want to know what's in the box. I'm curious, bud, but I said, I'm worried. And if you got something in that box that's dangerous, my level would feel way better if I knew what it was, because that would tell me you're not going to take it out of the box and do something bad to us. So I said, if we're going to go any further, I need you to tell me what's in the box, or we have to decide to pull over like at the next gas station, and you got to find a different ride. So I'm like, could you tell us what's in the box? So he takes the box and he shifts it from his side, and he puts it on his lap, and he starts tapping on the box, and I'm like, ooh, I just got the box open, right? He starts tapping on the box, and then he yanks it back, and he's like, none of your flippin' business, boys. And I was like, whoa. So Paul's letter continues. I became a servant of this gospel by the gift of God's grace given me through the working of his power. Although I am less than the least of all the Lord's people, this grace was given to me to preach to the Gentiles the boundless riches of this mystery, which for ages past was kept hidden in God, who created all things. His intent was that now, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known. Through the church, through the ecclesia, through this thing that he said all kinds of people are invited into. That's how the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms, basically to the rest of the world, according to his eternal purpose that he accomplished in Christ Jesus. The first thing I want to point out is Paul takes a minute here to point out that he became a servant of the gospel, the good news. Evangelion is the word here, the good news, this good message. And he became a servant to that by grace. And you guys are probably better people than I am, but I always have to remind that everything in my life has a little bit of grace to it. Sometimes I want to think that I went and I picked myself up by my bootstraps and I worked hard and I earned everything I have and this and this and this and this. And there is truth that I worked hard. There is truth that I try to do the right thing. There is truth that I grind out the world and that you grind out the world. But there's also a lot of truth that there's a ton of grace or gift in my life. And so Paul kind of isn't just trying to be like self-humbling here or whatever, but he's just trying to remind himself first that I'm here because of grace, because of gift. And if the reason I'm here because of grace and gift, then that means the reason you and everybody else can be here is because of grace and gift. This last weekend, we buried my grandpa, and he lived a good, long life, and he'd done some pretty cool things in his life. But there's a video out there, and I love the beginning of the video, because it's just a reminder that everything that happens in our life is grace. And he starts it out with, I'm the most fortunate man in the world. How could you be so fortunate to be born in this country? And I'm also the most fortunate man because I got the opportunity to be born and raised in Millette County, like we all do, by the Little White River, right? And then the third reason I was blessed is because of all these people that were in my life and that made it on. And so like this idea of, sure, I've done some things and some things have happened in my life, but there's a ton of grace on the way. It wasn't because I figured everything out and I had all the right answer. There was some grace. There was some gift along the way. And so Paul wants them to remember that in the middle of this, there's some gift. And the grace that he's been given is to preach this, and this is really important, the boundless riches of Christ, to make plain the administration of this mystery, which he kept hidden in past. So the thing he made Paul known was the administration of this grace. Administration is like organizing your house. Moms will understand this one much better. That I've been given the grace to come and kind of organize things so that this grace can be known. And how I'm organizing this is, before, Jews, you met here, Gentiles were not allowed, here were the system, and then you could work your way in. And I am reorganizing it where Jews and Gentiles are together. And somehow, in the middle of that, and in the midst of that, we are figuring out the mystery of Christ, and that is the gift. To make plain, to enlighten. So anyways, long story short, the guy tells us, well, you can just pull over then. So I said, fine. We'll pull over. And so now we're curious. I'm a little bit concerned for our safety. Adam gets out of the passenger side, he flips, how the seats flip open. And the guy is crawling out of the seat. He makes a mistake, right? He leaves the box on the center deal. And he's got his backpack strapped, and he's getting out of it. And I see my moment. And I reach back, and I flip open the box as soon as I can. And as soon as I see it, my heart starts to beat. My face gets white. My face gets red. The energy gets going. And this guy goes berserk. And I can tell you that what was in that box, it changed my life forever. I will never be, I'll never be the same from what I saw in that box. It sticks in my head. I almost have to get it out of my head every night when I go to sleep. So, continuing on.
What was in the box?
None of your flipping business, Junior. Yeah, woo! Story's kind of true, box wasn't there, but here's what I want you to think about. Did you have some curiosity? Right? Was there some mystery? Was there something you wanted to be uncovered? This is the word mystery that Paul is using in this scripture. That the gospel is something that is hidden, not like hidden, I don't want you to have it, but like hidden, I want you to try to figure it out. Almost more like a riddle, almost like being clever, almost like the gift is not that we have it figured out, but we have the opportunity for the rest of our life to wonder, to try to figure it out, to uncover it, to change it. In fact, here's what I want to point out, and then we're gonna come to the end here, is Paul goes on to say that that God's design was that through the church, through the gathering of his people, the manifold wisdom should be known. The manifold wisdom here, manifold means very various. That the very various wisdom would be known. Well, let me tell you, the more people we put together and we sit together with and we talk and we learn from and we grow from, the more very various the wisdom we will have. And God said that's what the mystery is that the church would get together and the manifold, the very various wisdom would come out. And the term church here is euangelion, which, guess, by the way, is meant to be a gathering of the citizens to figure stuff out. That's the term of the church in the Bible, is the gathering of citizens. It was a political term, getting the town together to figure things out with the very various people and thoughts and perspective. And that is the mystery that Paul says is our grace and our gift, is uncovering it and uncovering it and uncovering it. And you know what, Junior? It's none of your flipping business what's in the box. But it is our job to figure out what this looks like together. It is our job to be committed of a life to figuring out the mystery and living it in our lives. It is our job to create a gathering where we challenge people and we're challenged in our thinking. Because for Paul, that's the gospel. And is that disruptive? Yeah, it is. But it's in disruption that we get to rethink, we get to reprocess, and we get to change and move forward. I'm going to leave you with this quote. Wisdom, the Greek term here, is knowledge in action. And I'm going to leave you this quote from Adam Grant. He's got a great book. I can't remember the title of it, but it's really good. And he has a quote in his book that's been stirring with me. He said, if knowledge is power, we've always said knowledge is power, right? If you know stuff, you have power. And I think the church has been good at that. If knowledge is power, then wisdom is knowing what we don't know. So then wisdom is being a people that are eternally and passionately in the pursuit of trying to figure things out. Trying to figure out how to make this world better, how to figure out how to follow God in a way that makes sense. I'm going to invite the band up, and here's my challenge for you. May you be committed to the mystery of God. May you be committed to figuring out what's in the box and pulling off layer and layer and layer and layer, and know that when you find out what's in the box, it's only going to create more mystery. And may we be committed to doing that together. Gentiles, heathens, Jews, government leaders, people who make me go, booyah, yeah, right on, and people who irritate me. Because that is the church, and that is the gift. And that is where God has chosen to show up in the middle, in that assembly. May we be committed to the mystery of God, and may the mystery of God ever lead us forward in grace and peace.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Invitation Church podcast. I want to encourage you to take the message that you just heard and receive every part of it. Every promise from God, every declaration of His great love for you, every word of hope, every reminder that you have been made for more. Allow what you've heard to take root in your soul, to allow Jesus to do the deep work that only He can do. I also want to encourage you to be part of what we are doing here at Invitation as we invite people to live the way of Jesus. Go to the app and become a regular giver, an investor in the story that God is writing in this place. Also, if you found the message meaningful, we'd love to have you share it with someone else as you partner with us in carrying the message beyond the walls of the church. I want to thank you for being here with us. Grace and peace.